A very good afternoon and welcome to Society Talks. I'm Bronwyn Nielsen, your moderator for this session. We're looking at COVID-19 and the impact on SADC food systems and smallholder agriculture and policy options for a women-inclusive response. The structure will be looking at a 90-minute session in total. We have allocated speakers, and I will be introducing the speakers shortly. We will allocate time for Q&A, so I will mark the period where we go to Q&A after we have heard from all of the speakers, and we'll certainly be engaging. So we encourage you to engage with us and hold those burning questions for the engagement period. If I can just briefly go through our panelists and our keynote speaker for today's session. We have Mrs. Graça Machel, and Graça Machel is an African stateswoman whose decades-long professional and public life is rooted in Mozambique's struggle for self-rule and international advocacy for women and children's rights. She's a former freedom fighter in Mozambique's Frelimo movement and that country's first minister of education. Mrs. Machel has dedicated her life to improving the fate of women and children, inspiring hope, and building a more just and equitable world for us all. She works through several regional and international development bodies to accelerate social transformation and lends her expertise to a number of organizations in a governance role. And Mrs. Machel is our keynote speaker, and I'll be handing to her in just a moment. Domingos Gove is the Director of Food, Agriculture and Natural Resources at the SADC Secretariat. He is trained as a marine ecologist, and he has more than 32 years of working experience in areas of coastal and marine resources management, conservation and protection, and currently serves as the Director of Food, Agriculture and Natural Resources at the SADC Secretariat. Dr. Ruth Hall is chair and a professor at the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies, or PLAS. She holds a DPhil in politics from the University of Oxford, where her work focused on the interests, actors and discourses that influence the development of South African land reform policy. She leads a 5-country study on the politics and impacts of large-scale land acquisitions and convenes a small grants program of 20 smaller studies covering 14 African countries. We're joined also by Elizabeth Swide. Elizabeth is the founder member of African Agribusiness Academy, head of Africa Women in Agribusiness, a member of Professional Poultry Association, the Feed Mill Association, and vice chair of the Poultry Breeders Association. Elizabeth, as a leading woman in poultry industry in Tanzania, has received various awards, including the Change Driver Award and the Impact Award. We're also joined by Beatrice Makwenda, who is the head of policy and communication of the National Smallholder Farmers Association of Malawi, NASFAM. She's served in this role since 2006, working with a network of over 100,000 smallholder farmers. As a former organization, NASFAM aims to promote farming as a business, producing economic and social benefits for farmer members, their communities, and the country in conducive policy environment. With those introductions of our panelists, it is, of course, my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Mrs. Graça Machel, who is going to set the scenario for this Society Talks session. Mrs. Machel.
Oh, sorry, I was not on mute. Thank you so much to you, Bronwyn, for moderating this session. Thanks already to the speakers, panelists, and all those who are joining us this afternoon, and for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts with you at the beginning of this conversation, which I hope it will move from conversation to action. We are in times of COVID, and COVID has exacerbated all the social and economic inequalities, injustices, which we have been aware of, but we had become used to live with them and somehow to be indifferent to action, as if they are natural, as if there is nothing to do about it. We just have to live with them. The lockdowns which governments in the region have declared, then it slapped on our faces. We were forced to look at the reality. We couldn't turn away. And we have been forced then to act and to try to mitigate and even to rethink our practices. Let me give you examples. We always knew that there were very vulnerable families and communities in our nations. But only with lockdowns, we woke up to the need to provide for them, including distributing food for them to survive. Without lockdowns, I don't know whether we'd have the movement which governments have taken to organize themselves, even to dig deep and find the resources to provide for those very vulnerable families, even to the unemployed, and even to people who are living with disability. And nothing of this was new. We knew it was happening, but with lockdowns, then we were forced to acknowledge, to act, and to mitigate. And at a certain point then to rethink our practices, our strategies, and we are hoping with this conversation, we'll also rethink policies. We have been always aware of food scarcity in SADC. It's not new. We know that millions of people in each of our countries go to bed without food. We know that, even if I can bring another element, that our schools, they don't even have water to drink, let alone to think now in terms of COVID that they should have water and the soap to wash their hands if they are to be kept open. We have been always aware of the very high levels of malnutrition, let me call it exactly stunting, in our region. We have been also aware, and we were waking up to the impact of climate change. We knew. But last year, with EDI, it became very clear that this climate change thing doesn't hit only one country, it's a regional. And only if we look at ourselves as a region can have a proper response. But we were reminded also that this region is prone to this kind of climate hazards. It's with us, it will come back again. We have been living with droughts in Southern Africa. We know the regions which are, chronically dry, where there is no way they will be able to be self-sufficient in food. In each of our own countries, we know this very well. We have been also aware of the inadequacy of our policies, government's policies. We have been aware of that. We are aware of the lack of investment on smallholder farmers, the lack of investment on women. In fact, we have been aware of marginalization of women in terms of access to knowledge, to technology, to information, to capital, finances, very weak organizational capacity. All those things we have been aware of, we know they do exist. We are conscious that women have no voice in the decision-making bodies. We try to talk about it, but we have never taken a very active, approach to say, we have to impose women to be in decision-making bodies. Only then we can really deal with issues, one of inequality and injustice, as I mentioned at the beginning. It's not a secret to all of us that women are crucial for food security. That they are in families, they are the ones who produce food for all of us. There are statistics which indicate clearly that perhaps about 80% of our food is produced by women. We know that. But we have been like used to live with those realities in a way which really becomes so strange to me now to understand. But with the COVID, with all the human suffering which is exacerbating, I think we have an opportunity. So perhaps we should look at the COVID as a blessing, because it's shaking us. It's shaking our consciousness. It's shaking us, our lack of solidarity with one another, and even of accepting that those who have the prime responsibility to do what they do, they have to be forced to do it. It's not a question of doing us a favor. So I think this is the only thing I can say it's new. The urge to act, perhaps it's new. Or if better, I will say it's renewed now. And it starts with us, civil society organizations. It's not by chance that we are working together here. There are 4 or 5 organizations which came together to say what we should do and what is our responsibility. And instead of each one of our organizations trying to do its own things alone, we have to work together. So I think this is a good sign that we are listening to the suffering of our people. We are aware that we have a very important role to play. And because of that, we are beginning to organize ourselves and to work together. That's a very first point I want us to make as civil society organizations. Second, we know and we are ready to remind our governments that it's their prime responsibility to ensure that every single citizen in SADC doesn't go hungry to bed. It's their responsibility. We have to remind them. It's an obligation to make sure that this issue of people not having food, it has to come to an end. It means, in other words, we are here to organize ourselves to tell our governments that no tolerance anymore, no hunger in this region, to end the indignity, in fact, of our region in Africa in general, continue to import food with all the conditions which we have. In Southern Africa, we have rivers which are taking water to the ocean. We have fertile land. We have knowledge even. If we share knowledge, there's enough knowledge in this region and technology to produce food in excess even for export. So all which is needed is to mobilize those resources and work together, whether you are government, whether you are private sector, whether you are civil society organizations, whether you are scientists in research, to simply say, we are going to work together and we're going to put this indignity to an end. And we know it's not enough also to invest in the big business. No, the investment has to go to the millions of smallholder farmers. The investment has to go to families, because it's at the level of each family to do what it can to feed itself, and then it goes broader to our communities, to our regions, and to the nation. But it's investing in families. Of course, in the isolation, it's very difficult. So my proposal is that, we need to, as civil society organizations, to contribute to organize farmers, smallholder farmers in associations, because they can support one another. And even in terms of access to knowledge, access to technology, to information, even increasing the organizational capacity when they are in associations, when they are in cooperatives, when are in these very well-connected small, medium to the big enterprises, but working together in a chain, that is something which can quickly take us to the end goal we are talking about. But civil society organizations, at least in smallholder farmers, has a responsibility to be active and help to organize. And to organize in the whole value chain, this also is not new. We know that we have to organize people to be, for instance, to be, I mean, what we would say, the pre-production, which brings people as, how do you say, these growers, huh? You know, those who are provide the seeds, who are provides the inputs before we start production, and to organize people to do these small or medium enterprises to be able to provide the inputs necessary. That is the pre-production. But during the production itself, in storage, transport, assets to market. But an element which is important in all this, with the agenda lens approach. It's not about numbers. It's about the face of who is going to do this and the face of who is going to benefit first. Women, women, women all the time, in all different levels, including in the decision-making. Whether it's in association or it's in a cooperative or it is whatever, leadership of women in all those levels, up to the top, then to the point where there are no Minister of Agriculture who is going to call people to discuss agriculture without the presence of women, to bring the voice and aspirations and expertise of women on how they have been doing things and how they can improve what we want to achieve. But it means also that these women, they have to be organized in a way they are representative. It's not just to have a face of women there. Those women who have behind them associations, cooperatives, they will be speaking on behalf of thousands, they will be speaking on behalf of millions. So the voice of women we're talking about, it's not individual voice. Although we must and we will have the Elizabeths of the kind who have, I mean, big business. But as she's going to share with us, she is supporting, I mean, thousands of other people behind her. So we need to build those chains of taking the voice to the top, but also the voice of the top to go back to the families, to the small ones. And this is the role I believe civil society organizations have to play. But the world also has told us that now we are moving very quickly into digital era. And we know women are not in the digital era. And we are not going to allow a situation where they are going to be even further marginalized in the new world we are going to. So to advocate and to make sure there is investment in digital inclusion of women, it means the way they do business, the way they get access to finances, the way they get access to information in all spheres, that they have to go digital. Women have to be as digital as anyone else. And investing in infrastructures which go to rural areas, to urban areas in our townships. And more importantly, let's put it really much more integrated and say the informal sector, which is what is called the informal sector, to be part of the moving to the digital world in which we go. So I think I don't want to be too long here. And I tried even to be very, very practical. I'm not here to try to reproduce schemes of nice wording. I'm trying to say we have to really act. And to act, some of our organizations are very much specialized in advocacy. They have to do advocacy properly. But we need to identify organizations who are on the ground. And on the ground, they have to have also very clear tasks of what they do to help, to change the reality we are talking about. It's not only about talking, it's also about making things happen, making things change with real women who goes from thousands and it to become millions. And we should be accountable to say in 1, 2, 3, 4 years, how many millions of women we have brought to the formal economy, we have brought to the digital era, we have brought to the value chain we are talking about. All this has to be expressed in tangible human beings. It's not about numbers, it's tangible human beings. So I started my intervention to say nothing of what we are going to discuss this afternoon is new. What is new, I think, is to make of this COVID an opportunity in which we really increase our consciousness, and I'm not saying awareness, our consciousness that it is absolutely unacceptable to continue the way we are doing. We have to change completely. And we have the drive, we have the conviction, we have the capacity. We just have to say, this is unacceptable. And we give ourselves very clear goals of when and how we are going to achieve certain results. So I hope this discussion this afternoon will go to that kind of practicality to say, what do we tell our governments? Very practical, very clear, but we also, what we commit to do, how we commit to a change. I see Bronwyn here, she is our advisor on women in media. The messaging, which has to increase this profound consciousness to all women, that this is the time where women are to take the center stage. It is in agriculture, it is in education, it is in health, it is in social protection, all the areas which are of a human endeavor, women have to be at the center stage. This is the opportunity, and let us not squander it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Machel. And just to pick up on that, let's turn our COVID reality in an opportunity to change the status quo, the gender lens that Mrs. Machel is asking for. Women, women, women. And Mrs. Machel, I just want to pull out 5 essential points that you drove. One is that as civil society, we need to organize ourselves to work together. Government must ensure that every single citizen does not go to bed hungry. That is their obligation. Work together to put indignity to an end. Investment must go not just to big business, but to smallholder farmers, the majority of which are women. And also investment in digital inclusion. And that must drive the agenda for women across the African continent, irrespective of sector. Obviously, we're honing in right now on agriculture. Thank you very much, Mrs. Machel. I'd like now to invite Ruth, Dr. Ruth Hall, to address us. And Ruth, you're going to give us a broader assessment of the food systems and intersection of food security. So if you could shape that picture for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bronwyn. It's a real pleasure to be with you all. And thank you so much, Mrs. Machel, for your opening comments and proposals. There's an argument that if you're talking for a short time and you have a lot to say, you must make your main point right up front. So I'm going to do it now. Strengthening food production by itself is not going to solve the food crisis in our region. We have a crisis in our food system that extends far beyond the amount of food that is being produced. The problems relate to how input industries control inputs and pricing, and how difficult it is for people who are poor to access these. It has to do with the enclosure and privatization of land, of water, and of seed. It relates to how value chains work, how relationships between market actors work. It relates to the degree to which supermarkets and big retail and big food manufacturing control systems. So My sense is that what we're seeing now, of course, as Mrs. Machel has said, are things that we knew already, but things have become a whole lot more stark. And so we're going to have to not just do more of the same, but really think honestly about some of the things that we've been doing that are actually aggravating the structural problems in our region. So South Africa epitomizes some of the problems within the region, although there are important differences across countries. We now know that nearly half of all households in South Africa ran out of money for food during April. That was the first month of lockdown. Things have got a lot worse since. We know that now adults are shielding children, particularly women going without food, because there is not enough food for their children and themselves. So we are heading into a territory where, in fact, the legitimacy of our national governments, of the state, is in question if it cannot provide the means of life for its citizens. If lockdown is not accompanied with the kind of measures that enable people to survive, we are in a really troubling time. I would totally agree. Food is a feminist issue. There are strong intersections, especially in our region, with questions of race, with class, etc. But the procurement and preparation of food is very much women's work, but also it's women who are in the most vulnerable positions, not only as producers of food, but in trade, in retail. A lot of these informal sectors are based on women's work. So there's a wider issue at stake here. I would emphasize that we have a problem that has been undealt with in our region that is actually still a colonial problem in countries like South Africa and Namibia, where the vast majority of rural people have no access or very limited access to land, and where most of the land is held in large-scale farms. We have had 3 decades nearly of failed land reforms that have not redistributed access to land. So we have an access problem. It's not just about increasing productivity on existing land. Zimbabwe has had a dramatic redistribution of land, but there are other wider problems. At the same time, many of the other countries in our region that have been based on small-scale peasant family farming have actually seen large-scale corporate-driven and state-supported land acquisitions that have driven more people off the land. And this is particularly since the financial crisis of 2008. So we see that, in fact, some of the unsolved problems of a colonial legacy are actually happening alongside new forms of enclosure and dispossession in other parts of our region. These are things that are making our populations much more vulnerable to hunger, both as producers and as many people have no option but to migrate to cities where there aren't any jobs. So a few small general points. We have a large number of small-scale producers in this region. They're often operating under very difficult circumstances. Often what has happened during our lockdown is that small-scale producers and informal value chains have been disrupted, while the big corporate value chains have been protected. So large industrial farms in South Africa are operating at full steam. They are linked in with their commercial value chains. It is the smaller operators who have been locked down by these provisions. So what we see is exactly what we expected, which is the supermarket shelves are stocked, and yet people are going really hungry. This is not just a production issue. So at the same time, I think that it's important that we emphasize that a lot of the relief measures have been very, very weak in their reach. And that the most important thing is that we address people as producers and as consumers of food at the same time. What we know in the region is that there have been border closures, there have been disruptions of value chains. In many cases, small-scale producers who produce for export have lost their export market. So the problem is, in fact, they have a surplus that they cannot get to market at all. Many people are saying this is our moment to recognize that addressing the chronic hunger in our region means we need to move away from relying so much on global commodity chains. We need to stop relying so much on bought inputs from global markets that are often denominated in US dollars and are vulnerable to fluctuations in our exchange rates, and to relocalize food systems. One part of that has to be about providing large-scale support to small producers to do what they do well at a small scale, types of production where there are not strong economies of scale and where women excel. Fresh vegetable production for local markets can be made possible by providing more ready access to common land, to land with access to water close to the growing cities in our regions. A lot of this land is already owned by local government and other institutions. Where it's privately owned, well-located land with water can be acquired through the market. It can be expropriated, whether with or without compensation, to allocate to low-income women who have the capacity and interest to produce food for themselves and for local markets. Many people are saying that women make all of these decisions. They're involved in savings clubs. They provide for funerals, for weddings. But where is this food that they're buying from? Is it just being bought from faraway farms, or are they able to build their own communities by buying locally and circulating money within their own communities? Some people have a term for this. It's called food sovereignty, that instead of relying on international open markets to secure our access to food, at a local level, a territorial level within our countries, people should be able to choose what inputs they're using, what seeds, and be able to buy locally, support their own communities, and to keep the money circulating within communities as a way of building those food production sectors. I think that we need to think both about emergency interventions, but we need to think about, in the interventions, how are we restructuring some of these long-term problems of inequality and access to land, problems of very exclusive and corporate-dominated input industries, problems of enormous supermarket domination that squeezes out small-scale traders, many of whom are women. So let's think about structural changes that can be embarked upon as we move forward. A lot of people say that one way to think about the food system in the direction in which it is changing in Southern Africa is that South Africa, with its colonial and apartheid past, dominated by few big farms, few big supermarkets, this is an image that is becoming more evident in other countries in the region. Zambia is having more and more bigger farms. More and more food that people are buying is from the large supermarkets. In fact, in many ways, South Africa is exporting its industrial farm production and its industrial food manufacture and big supermarket retail model to the rest of the region. The problem here is not about efficiency. The problem is about equity. The question is, who gets access to that food? We're in a region where there are not many growing urban jobs. And so we have to have a food system that not only provides accessible and affordable, nutritious food, but also creates livelihoods for many people within it. And one thing we've learned in South Africa is that our food system can be very productive. It can produce massive surpluses at a national level. But if half our households cannot afford to eat, then our food system is broken. And it's broken particularly for women. I agree totally. Women's voices must come out, but let's also be real that women are not all the same. And there are class differences. And often government finds it far easier to support a few people who already have access to skills, who have access to capital, and to support them to be winners. It's far harder to engage with large communities of people who need significant support. So I think that as we move forward, perhaps the two things we need to do is to recognize that as we try to shift the food system, there is a need for basic income support. The UN Secretary General last week called for countries around the world to consider putting in place some basic income support for everyone in every society. We all have constitutional rights to food in our countries. All our governments have signed up to the African Union FAO guidelines on the right to food. And yet it's not a reality. We need to be thinking about basic income without means testing and aggressively pulling back that money through taxation. Then we need to be looking at the structural changes in our food system. Importantly, at a SADC level, looking at seed policy and support for seed saving and supporting local forms of seed markets. Secondly, support for people moving into lower input types of agriculture, agriculture that isn't dependent on expensive bought inputs. Thirdly, increasing access to the commons, to water, to forests, to the land. Often women's participation in the food system is not only by crop farming, but also collection of forest products and other things. We also need to be looking at regulating the big private sector and ensuring are supermarkets buying from small-scale producers? And what is the state doing? The state actually shapes the food system through public procurement for schools, for hospitals, for prisons and other institutions. I looked at the statement from the African Union Ministers of Agriculture when they met on the 16th of April. And they made statements that were very much about affirming the approach that has been taken before. What I was struck by was the commitment to keep all our borders open and to keep regional trade intact. And I think that that's crucial. But let's be clear that our food systems can work in complementary ways if we keep our regional borders open. That continued reliance on very long value chains where we're buying inputs from overseas and selling into overseas markets makes our food system in Southern Africa very vulnerable to global economic changes and to speculation and other forms of financialization. So I would say that some of the things we need to do is relocalize and focus on the basics, on getting access to the commons and on supporting people to do what they already know how to do. Thank you.
So Ruth, thank you so much. And you've given us so much food for thought, excuse the pun there, but I'm going to push you because I've suddenly made you Minister of SADC Food Security, right? This is your portfolio. You have 3 interventions which you have the opportunity to drive. I need you to distill the 3 key interventions. Remember, Mama Machel was saying action, action, action. Give me those 3 interventions that can make a direct and immediate impact to food security.
Okay. Number 1 is about access to common property resources, giving access, priority access to well-located land with water where women can produce vegetables and rear particularly small livestock. I'm talking about goats and chickens for local markets. This is where people who have little capital and who are going to operate at a small scale have a comparative advantage. That's what needs to be done. Municipalities should be saying, here is the land, who is wanting to move in? Can we help you with JoJo tanks, with fencing, and with small amounts of capital? We've looked at examples where 5,000 to 10,000 Rand can get people going on a basis to move up. Secondly, making available public land and infrastructure for informal markets, where women can either be selling as producers or where they can sell to other people as traders, with infrastructure, including storage and refrigeration, in well-located places, so that people who are poor in working class communities don't have to go to a big supermarket. We actually know that the poorer people, when given the choice, prefer to buy from small-scale traders on the street. Third thing I think we need to address is the support for local production of inputs within our region. I think that our heavy reliance on chemical fertilizers, on GM seeds from overseas, these are things that have been pushed by a particular model of agriculture that assumes that if we copy what was done in the American Midwest, we can become a grain basket. But that model was based on massive subsidies, and we know that it supports a tiny fraction of their national population. We should be careful about taking models that were created.
So Ruth, I'm going to come in here and 3 perfect interventions. And as we bring in Elizabeth Swy, followed by Beatrice Mkwenda, we're really going to look now at what you have tabled and see what appetite both Elizabeth and Beatrice have for those initial interventions to increase food security. So Elizabeth, can I ask you to take the floor and to give us a sense of what smallholder farmers and businesses are actually facing, the challenges that you're facing, and is Ruth going some way to immediately alleviate your position? If you can just unmute there. Elizabeth, and if I can't get hold of
yeah. Thank you so much. Taking up from what Mama Graça Machel had just said, and on the whole aspect of food security and how women think. I think it's high time now, us as women and the game changers who have that capacity and daring capacity to come up with business models that touch many smallholder farmers or households. I think it's all about thinking differently. We should not only think as a feminist only, we should think as women who have an agenda on business development. Now, thinking business has a lot to do with a lot of capacity building at a individual level and also at the smallholder farmer levels. Now, why I'm saying this, this will only break the barriers of how we think and how we do our things. Now, going back to COVID-19, as for me, I would also support Mama Graça Machel as Elizabeth. I did not lock down in Tanzania, even though the policy and the instructions said that we should lock down. But I thought myself as a company that is dealing with the food security, and there would be a time that Elizabeth and the company members would be responsible to take care of other Tanzanians or even neighboring countries. Now, for me, COVID-19 made me think outside the box and come up with more modern way of thinking agriculture. That is one way, which I will share shortly. Secondly, thinking about policy issues, we had these policy issues before COVID-19. For example, we had these trade barriers in Africa. So we distributed Africa as a zonal continent that you cannot trade here, you cannot trade here. So we have those trade barriers, policies that I think could be, as women in business, we could take a step to change or to convince our policy leaders to think about those barriers. For example, my company is also supporting some women businesses in Kenya. So once you're introducing policies for border closures, that means that woman that we have trained in Kenya would not be able to access other households in Kenya. That's why I'm thinking that it's very crucial as women, we should take a step forward and look at these policies and see how they're disrupting our own development in Africa. And that's why I'm convinced that we should stop thinking as feminists, but we should think as business leaders who are taking a business step to change the mindset of women that we are working with, whether smallholder farmers or whether franchises that we are developing. That's one of my comments from the previous two speakers. But again, when I go into deeper, I'm thinking that as a business person, a woman who has an opportunity to have that level of perseverance should take responsibility to bring into the game the other women who don't have that. And that's why the second speaker was speaking about women are different. But if we find that women are different, then the ones who are different than the others and who can take a leadership control, they should also think about how they can impact their fellow women, whether smallholder or small businesses. And you should not only look at the countries they are in, they should also look over the borders where they exist. Say, for example, with the model that I'm working, it allows the company with the integration in poultry businesses to create franchises, poultry franchises that can benefit everybody, can literally solve nutrition issue, which Mama Graça Machel has just mentioned that Africa is suffering a lot of malnutrition issues, stunted growth. We are also having maternal issues. And we could even use a small project like Poultry Project to make sure that every child under 5 is accessing an egg a day. And that can be done across Africa. But if we are having these trade policy issues, we are having control issues in, say, for example, in ministries of livestock, that product cannot reach other countries and we cannot solve other problems in other countries. So when we are taking leadership and when we are taking this big responsibility, I think the first issue that we have to look at is to look at the policies in place in the country and outside the country and align the gaps and be able to address the gaps so that the services from the women who have businesses that can change lives of other people in terms of economy, nutrition, whatever that is, to be able to smoothly integrate into other countries without having automatic lockdowns. So for me, COVID-19 is not the only lockdown. For me, trade barrier policies is also a lockdown. And it has been there. And it is disrupting a lot of transactions in terms of farm input supplies, existing markets, extension service, which is also very critical in agriculture. And we have a bigger gap of agriculture, but extension service can be trained and it can be adopted. Yeah.
So I'm going to get Beatrice to come in a moment, but I have now made you Minister of Food Security for SADC. I'm going to assume that you are going to change some policies. Which 3 policies are you going to change with immediate effect to impact food security?
Thank you for that. I don't have to be a minister to change a policy. I have to participate to change a policy, in which I do participate in my own level to make sure that the policies in Tanzania that addresses not only my company, not only poultry business, but also agriculture as a whole. Because when you are talking about the gaps and challenges in agriculture and livestock, we are talking about extension service, accessibility of farm input supply, agronomic services. We are talking about digitalization of the agriculture. We are talking about all these issues that are concerning with the technologies so that we can think agriculture, extra.
And agreed. So we've got, and I fully understand, and I take your point that you don't need to be a minister, but I'm making you the boss. Neither a government nor private, you are the boss of food security in SADC right now. Look, I love the low-hanging fruit. An egg a day for every single child. It goes with what Mama Machel was saying earlier, that no child should go to bed hungry. An egg a day for every child, that makes sense. Open up your borders. We need to open up borders for smallholder farmers. That was what Ruth was saying, that smallholder farmers are being impacted by the lockdowns, not the big institutions. Would you agree?
Yes, I do agree, and I think the models of businesses can change the whole lot of perception or by the policymakers. Because, say, for example, if we have to put an egg on each child in Africa, that means poultry keepers in Africa would have a lot of access to, of course, access to land, because then the policy would have to approve access to land so that the smallholder farmers keep chickens. And also to strike up and come up with big nutrition projects that the government should fund, and to develop school feeding projects, for example. And to make sure that smallholder produce for a certain structured market, that the government should be part and parcel of that project. That means by doing that, we are going to solve issues of malnutrition across Africa, from south to north of Africa.
Thank you very much for that, Elizabeth. I'm going to ask Beatrice now to add her voice to the discussion as we build. And of course, we are getting a very strong theme, which is support local, buy local, keep the money on the continent, and get our economies firing on all cylinders. Beatrice, can I ask you please to take the podium?
Thank you for all these insights. I think right away from the keynote, as well as the contributions from Ruth and Elizabeth. And I think for us here, when in March, when the COVID pandemic started now to show its ugly side on the subcontinent, but more so for Malawi, it was also the time where most of the rural households, especially women, were looking forward to their payday, because that's now tied in with at the onset of the marketing season, actually. So they are tending to their crops, they are harvesting, they are organizing and preparing for markets, and then boom, the whole marketing arrangements and organizations around markets get disrupted. So there was a bit of really anxieties from that front to say, what now are we going to do? At the same time, the triple challenges that we've been talking about on what women are facing, then they get exacerbated, especially when now schools are out, then kids are at home. So it's really a challenging period for women farmers, especially even for rural communities that are now the normal way of accessing their means of livelihoods and income had taken a different shape. So we had actually now to engage to say markets still have to work even in the face of the pandemic for women. But how do we do that? Because now eventually the private sector, big businesses, off-takers, the borders are closing, they can no longer participate effectively in cross-border. So even the demand side of what has been produced was beginning to start shaking, to say what sort of marketing arrangements now work. So we have now to have a different conversation all of a sudden and have it immediately, because one, you didn't want to experience a case where now people don't have storage facilities. They can no longer keep this produce for long. Otherwise, then we would talk about increased losses. Already we say that we experience the smallholder farmers, especially even the women farmers, experience higher post-harvest losses. And all of a sudden, they cannot completely access the market immediately as they would. Now they have to go through either a scheduled marketing or for some sort of arrangement. Then we have another emerging problem that needed quick address at that point. So a conversation had to quickly come up at local level, but more so even at for public and private sector discussions. At the same time, you cannot meet because the measures require you not to be in close proximity with others. So all of a sudden, you have a new way of dealing with things. We all go Zoom, we all go digital to have these difficult conversations. At the center of this all, then the farmer who really is supposed to take part is no longer included. So for many years, especially from civil society point of view, and especially from the Rural Women's Assembly, we find that the many years we have built in as far as getting the dialogue platforms work, getting women farmers to participate in policy decision makings and programming have all of a sudden collapsed. Now we are looking at digitalization, and these things are not accessible. That's the reality. Because even from a farm organization point of view, we looked at, okay, at this point in time, we need to get the messages out on how farmers should not have the desperate sales to sell to the things that would not make business sense to them and still work until the marketing arrangements are done to work. But how do you then communicate? You can no longer travel to the next district to meet with farmers because one, social distancing requires that you cannot gather over 100. And all of a sudden, even as actors, as a Rural Women Assembly, as farm organizations, even from NASFAM point of view, already your cost of transaction has shot up. already you see that the budget that you had initially anticipated that you are going to engage with farmers, now if you had 5 meetings, now you have to have smaller ones to accommodate the COVID prevention measures. And this is a toll on especially development actors to say, how do we still make it work in this, and then still have the dialogue, the inclusion of the necessary voices, the voices that matter in this discussion. And I'll pick a valid example that then we looked at increasing our reach on radio, for example. And women are not on radio because in the first place, we are calling for more hand washing, more issues to do with hygiene. And it means they have to access water and they don't have piped water in there. So you have increased that burden of making sure that the women ensure that they have more access to water, and it's not water that is easily available for them. So they are not there to listen to this messaging at all. Then we even said, okay, let's utilize SMS, phone. At least now we find a lot of farmers, a lot of women have access to a phone. And the reality is that phone is actually for the household, and probably it's either in the hands of the youth in the family or the man in the family. Now you're not reaching out to the farmers at all. We actually had to check the delivery of such messages to the farmers. And you find on a 100% database, only 40% have received, because one, you now have to do with, they don't have power all day. They need to move to the next trading center to charge their phone. And the SMS, they say that within 24 hours, you have to deliver. Otherwise, with that, then the delivery of that message has expired. So you find they haven't even gotten this message at all. So it's quite really a challenging period in as far as really how do we get the women voices in this difficult time to still make sure that they have access to the necessary information. They have access, because now you say you are communicating more via these digital platforms, so they know when the market will be, at what prices their commodities are going to be, so that they can make these informed choices. So it's really I would want to agree that yes, these have been the challenges we have known in the past, but wait a minute now. It's probably the time that we needed to act in as far as the realities of digitalization, energy, access to water. We were just more on talk and less on action on these points. And the COVID-19 situation has really heightened some of these conversations. And this week has really been particularly depressing, I would say. We are talking of agriculture now, and mostly, of course, is the participation of rural women. But you find if within a week you hear that there are now over 3,000 teenage pregnancies, and this burden is on women.
So Beatrice, you are now boss. You are boss of food security across SADC. There are 3 things that you can do. And of course, we're leading up to Domingos taking the platform in a moment. So tell me those 3 things that you can do immediately to change the food security status quo. And of course, remembering what Mama Machel said, let's use COVID-19 as an opportunity. You've spoken extensively about digitization. Build on that for me.
All
3
right.
things.
3 things. So first of all, one, we have regional agriculture policies and also national agriculture policies. Let's look at the investment in those. Already we have an opportunity, because even in this situation, nations have budgets that have been allocated. To what extent is it? Is there a better share between the emergency response in terms of getting food to these households, but also investing in the structural issues? For example, in September, we'll be talking for another agriculture season. How is the region looking at food acquisition that responds to when they are going to access? Looking at the alternatives, already we're talking on indigenous seed systems. This is the time to make it work, because probably they may not get the necessary inputs because of the transport challenges the region is also facing. So let's get our indigenous seeds together and making sure that we are consolidating the local seed systems and making sure that it's getting out. So we have that conversation that the current regulatory systems are not responding to. It's the time that we need to accelerate alternative and alternative food as well as the farmers' rights issues around seed systems. Then the second one, I think we need to look at this digital. Let's work with the communications in the communication sector. Look at the cost of access to airtime, to the access to internet. Let's look at the cost and bring those costs down. Of course, we are trying to have a data must fall campaign, but let's look at the realities to say, is this really even affordable in as far as if we are to make the digital platform a key medium for it? So the information sector needs to be looked at as well. And then of course, the whole education on how we are going to make extension work as well as the private sector to tick in this particular. So the measures that have been put in place, I know commercial banks have been brought on board, but let's tailor-made access to credit and access to financial services to also this particular sector, especially the rural women, because they can no longer use land as a collateral. Let's lower those particular standards. So those are the three things that really I would make sure that the sector starts to tick and tick immediately.
Thank you, Beatrice. Salient points there being put forward. And Domingos, I'm now going to bring you up. Of course, we've changed the status quo. We've heard from civil society. We've heard from the farmers. We are now bringing in, of course, Domingos Gove, who is Director of Food, Agriculture and Natural Resources at the SADC Secretariat. And Domingos, you've got a number of low-hanging fruit items that have been put on your plate. Let's hear from your thoughts in terms of SADC engagement from a food security perspective and how we can fast track some of these action points that have been tabled.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this panel and this discussion. I must confess that it's not a normal situation. Generally, we meet with ministers and head of states, but not at this platform. And really, I think we are missing a little bit the point, but actions are being implemented to ensure that the civil society is fully part of the discussion and decision-making within the SADC processes. So I would like to chair for the opportunity. I'm also very delighted to be in the panel where Mama Graça is part of. I'm coming from Mozambique, by the way, and also be part of these very distinguished panelists and participants. And I recall some of the panelists that I've met some times ago. In terms of the impacts of COVID in our region, we are having impacts in terms of the economic contraction. The SADC region will be contracting its economy by around 3%. And also we have had disruption of cross-border transport. So these in terms of general aspects. As Mama Graça has indicated, the COVID is coming to our region, but we have our backdrop in terms of the food security. Before lockdowns, we had around 41.2 million Southern Africans that were food insecure already. And this figure is the highest in a decade. According with the synthesis report that we released yesterday about the status on food and nutrition security and vulnerability in our region, currently we have an estimation, we estimate around 45 million people that are food insecure. This is around 13% of the total population of the region. Obviously, these the rural areas are the one most impacted. We have 75%, and the remaining is from the urban area. And this figure is 10% increase in relation to the figure that we had last year in terms of food insecure people. We have examples of Malawi that the food insecurity has increased by 140%. We have Eswatini 58, and Zimbabwe 40%. And as Mama Graça has indicated, stunting rates are really very high in our region, reaching around 30%, which is really very high. But also the malnutrition can be expressed in many ways. And one of the ways is overweight. In a region that we have lack of food, there are some countries that are showing overweight children under 5 years, which is more than 10%. This is actually double of the percentage for the entire world. So the food production in a large number of member states has decreased during this financial, this current year, and this includes Madagascar, southern Mozambique, Zimbabwe mainly in terms of maize production, southeastern Angola, Lesotho, and Eswatini. So when we are talking about the impact of COVID, we can say that at this stage, and as everyone is fully aware, the numbers are increasing every day. So it's not possible to have the full impact of COVID that we have to do along the way. The assessment that we've done in terms of food production is that COVID has not yet, had limited impact on food production, because when COVID started, we were going to the end of the agriculture season. So the impact was not significant. In fact, in terms of maize harvest, we are predicting an increase by 8% of maize harvest in this season. And this is following the trend internationally. There was a record production of maize, wheat, and rice internationally. And eventually that can be benefiting the countries because of low prices for buying these goods. The main impact of COVID is its contribution to poverty. That is the trigger for all the situation that we are going through in the region because of reduced economic activities due to lockdown and border restrictions. This has impacted in terms of reduction on ability of the poor to buy food. And if we look into the poor, normally we look into the rural area, but now we have also an equally to look into the urban poor who rely fully on market for food. So they don't have the power to buy food and be able to eat. And also in the rural poor, they rely on remittances. In some areas, close to conservation areas, they rely on tourism that has completely stopped. And also the children in those areas, including the urban areas, they rely on food feeding programs. They're really having a huge impact in terms of food security in our region. If we are looking for the rural food insecurity, we predict that it will pick up in November 2020, January 2021, when the current food stocks that the rural community have are depleted. But also,
Domingos,
yes.
Could I just jump in here and just in terms of what Elizabeth has tabled, what Beatrice has tabled, and what we heard from Ruth and Mama Machel, how can we fast track? Because again, when you talk about food security and production and the maize crops, etc., not being impacted, that's really big business. It's the smallholder farmer that's lost the seat at the table. One, because everything has gone digital, and as Beatrice was correctly saying, women farmers, rural women farmers, don't have access to digital platforms. So if I was to say to you, how can we get the voice of smallholder farmers, particularly women who are the majority, to be heard by SADC Response? What would you suggest? What are the ways that we can get those voices or a seat at the table? Because they're the ones who've had their crops interrupted. They cannot go to market. The cross-border shutdowns that they used to depend on from a market's perspective have been eliminated. Can I put that question to you?
Yes, thanks for the question, but the answer will not be easy because as you can imagine from SADC perspective, we are working mainly at strategic level, at the regional level, and then the implementation should be done by the member states. But as I have indicated earlier, as SADC in terms of structure, we are currently looking into the way to increase the voice of the society because there is a full recognition that in the SADC process that we are doing, the voice of the society is not so visible. And this includes aspects that are related to work to strengthen the SADC Parliament, but also the inclusion of the civil society in the discussion and decision-making process within SADC. But if I can progress based on that, I would like to say that whatever we are discussing, as Mama Graça and the other panelists has indicated, it's known, it's there, and I can give you very quick examples. The issue of food and nutrition security, it's addressed in Sustainable Development Goals 1 and 2. I mean, ending hunger, poverty and zero hunger. It's there, and the member states have committed themselves. At the African level, we have the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, CADAP, which was updated through the Malabo Declaration. And if you look, for example, the biennial report that was published in February 2020 in the Africa Union Summit, the SADC region is totally not on track for addressing the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program. So it's zero. And I can give you quick examples. For example, boosting intra-African trade, which we are speaking here. In 2017, we had 7 SADC member states that were on track. In 2019, we decreased to the half. Resilience on climate change, there is no progress from the SADC member states. Strengthening mutual accountability, in 2017, we had 9 SADC member states, and currently we have only 2. So we are not on track. And these are processes that have been discussed in detail. We know exactly what we are expected to do. We committed as governments, but nothing has happened. And specifically to our region, we have the regional agriculture policy that Beatrice has referred to. And the regional agriculture policy that was approved in 2014, we have a tool to implement it through the Regional Agriculture Investment Plan 2017-2022. But the progress is not the desirable one. So I think in terms of actions, rather than trying to reinvent things, I think we have to look to existing policies and strategy and discuss now how best we have to fast track and ensure that this policy, they trickle down until to the small scale and to the women.
Domingos, thank you very much. I think we're into 15 minutes. We've got 20 minutes before close out. I'd like to open it up now to the audience, and we'll have a Q&A, and then Machel is going to close out for us. I'm going to just pull from some of these questions, and Mama Machel, a question for you. And this is basically coming through a process of revising the national land policy is underway in Mozambique. Many think this will open doors for land privatization, although the president has guaranteed that the land will continue to be state property. What is the purpose of this institutional adjustment? Why is it being done during the COVID pandemic? And what are the implications of this on the land tenure systems of small-scale producers and consequently on Mozambique's food security? Mama Machel, I don't know if we can put that to you at this point and whether you have input there.
I'm sorry, I was not unmuted. The president has launched this process of revision of land policy. Fortunately, he has also created space for civil society organizations to become part of the consultations which have to go down to people, especially to rural people. And this process brings civil society organizations from different provinces of the country, which will bring in, the knowledge and the specific issues which are being raised in each province. So we look at this with some optimism that the voices of people, the voices of associations, the voices of civil society organizations will be listened to. We are not convinced that Mozambique needs a revision of the land policy, and we have to be proven if the consultation will confirm that need. But the fear which exists is exactly that this will open a space for the big corporations, particularly the global ones, and because Mozambique doesn't have a big corporate, industry in agriculture, honestly. Most of those who are operating here are global. So it will open space for them to grab land. And even what they're saying that if you don't use the land, you can rent it to your neighbor, etc. That's the beginning of the privatization of land, of pushing the communities and pushing the smallholder farmers to lose land. So some of us have very strong views against this revision, and we are hoping that really the process will be sufficiently open to bring the opinions of people, and that at the end, the voice and the concerns of the majority of people will be taken into account. Because we have had also cases in which, yes, they listen, but they don't take into account when they continue to do what they had decided even before the consultation. So we are watching this with a very, very keen interest.
I've just lost a signal. I'm not sure if anybody can hear me at this stage. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that input, Mama Machel. And then, Domingos, there was a question coming through in terms of perhaps we need to fast track a committee that consists of civil society, of policymakers, of smallholder farmers to weigh in on SADC response to COVID-19 from a food security perspective. Domingos, can I get you to come in?
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's a good idea. But I just want to point out that we are working through procedures. In relation, for example, for the small scale farmers, we do have processes to engage with them. For example, the Eastern and Southern Africa Small Scale Farmer Forum is part of our processes. The way that civil society could be involved, I think this is a discussion that is there, but should also include the member state, because as you know, the member states, they have all the power to take decision on any aspect that we are addressing at Secretariat. But I think it's a very important point to take into account, and it's a situation that we have to address it as a matter of urgency. I would think.
Ruth, can I bring you in here in terms of what you've heard and getting a seat at the table for smallholder farmers, the lack of digitization and internet access being a key concern. Obviously, you tabled a number of plans around buying local, supporting local, about access to land for women. Could you weigh in just as we get to close with final thoughts from your side?
Yes, three particular thoughts, since you like the number 3. Firstly, the last time we had a global financial crisis was 2008. Heading into that recession, what did we see? A massive influx of foreign investor interest in African land and water. We had basically a land grab that was only could be compared to what happened in colonial times. We're going to face that again. We have a climate crisis. We have a growing world population. We have a crisis of inequality within our region and globally. And our natural resources are going to be prize pickings. So, for instance, the revision of a land law to facilitate more foreign investment, to facilitate privatization, to try and consult people on their own disposition is extremely worrying. I think that, secondly, I want to applaud the SADC Secretariat on emphasizing urban agriculture. The urban issue is huge in our region. And finally, I think that while there are established procedures for engagement between civil society organizations, women farmer associations, and the SADC bodies, I think that we all know that those have not worked optimally, and we're not in normal circumstances. If we were to think of how do we behave in a different way in abnormal times, I would suggest that the SADC Secretariat and the governments in the member states in our region reach out to the primary organizations through which women farmers organize, give them access to data, and set up a special high-level platform for regular online virtual engagement. It's not expensive. We don't have to fly people to Windhoek or to Gaborone. We can do this online as long as you give people data so that people like Elizabeth and Beatrice can organize and their membership can engage directly with the SADC authorities. Otherwise, we're using pre-COVID technologies in a COVID era. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Elizabeth, let me get you to weigh in, followed by Beatrice, and then Mama Machel, I'm going to ask you to come in before we hand to Machel to close. Elizabeth?
Yeah, thank you. I think Africa, as Africa together, we should have, we should try to change. We should reach a point where, as we are talking results, and we are not talking about strategies all the time, because strategies are always there. They are the same strategies, they are the same meetings of the member states, they are the same policies, they are the same challenges, and we don't see a plan that has results. And I think there should be a time that our member states or business people, and in collaboration with the farmers, we should own Africa. We should have a plan for results. And in case we are talking about investments, we should also think about digitalization of agriculture. We should not allow excuses that, farmers cannot access technology, because farmers have the right to access technology. So I think one of the issues that we should encourage is technology. We should encourage about crowdfunding for our farmers. We should encourage about money transfers for our farmers. We should encourage about having a database or platforms where we can manage our own statistics, where we can manage our own data, where we can map the farmers. And because from there, we would have plans to be able to have actual results from whatever policies we have, because policy we do have. They are good policies. They need just a little bit of change. But I think it is high time we should look at the policies and change them into actual plan and into actual results. Thank you.
Exactly, and really echoing Domingos there as well. The policies are there, but it's right translating them into action. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Beatrice. We might have missed Beatrice. If you are there, please feel free to come in. Beatrice?
Yes, I think for us to really move on forward now is, I think Domingos has already laid out. Now it's what are the low-hanging apples that we should see getting going to really, you already talked about contracting economies. We cannot continue on this path. And I think as SADC needs really to look at what is happening in the different countries and provide the necessary advisories that are inclusive enough from women farmers as well. So let's look at those investments and advise where the investment's going, because now I think probably the focus may be on the emergency, but let's get the economies working for the farmers, and that's ensuring access to production inputs and ensuring that soon climate change is still a reality to now. So even in this, let's plan for continue to build the resilience that take us through as we move to the next level. And then yes, let's have meaningful engagement with private sector in this case. And we are not talking of high industrial private sector, but let's harness the small and medium enterprise, agro-dealers, what is happening to the agro-dealer network in the region with all what is happening, so that we get them in the right places and that there is a connection amongst the countries. So yeah, I think we would really look forward to see that. I've read the report that you released yesterday, and I think we can do much better to now looking at what results are we going to produce in the shortest period of time to start seeing economies survive this pandemic.
Domingos, before I turn to Mrs. Machel, just a final word from you, sir.
Thanks. I think this is a great opportunity. SADC is here for the individuals, of course, through the governments, but also the civil society is fully part of the state. So I think it's a great opportunity to be in the panel and to hear the people that are really doing business. And yeah, it's comfortable for us, and we should continue with this. Thank you very much.
And Mrs. Machel, you set us a task at the beginning of our conversation with your keynote address. Could you weigh in with final thoughts before I hand to Machel? Mrs. Machel, I'm not sure if you are on mute at the moment.
It looks like we might have lost her. I don't see her on the screen.
Machel, I'm going to ask you to take the platform then. Of course, Machel joining us, and Machel, if I get your title right, Madzomuse, who's the CEO of the Southern Africa Trust. And this is obviously a collaboration with the Graça Machel Trust. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to the panelists for such a rich discussion. It's a pity we lost Mama Machel at the end there. But I think in a wrap up, I just want to go back to what she said at the beginning, which was talking about COVID being, having presented an opportunity and shaking our unconsciousness and the lack of solidarity. And from what we were hearing around the panel discussion is a lack of solidarity across the board, lack of solidarity in some cases between the state and its citizens, between smallholder farmers and business, but even within the farming community, a lack of solidarity with the role that women play as the central providers and drivers of production in the agricultural sector. I quite liked as well what she said about, which for me pointed to what the clarion call should be as civil society in our engagement with state entities, is that call to the end to hunger and the end to indignity. I think that ought to be an important call that we take forward in our engagement going forward. I liked the discussion and where we were going once we got to talking about engagement with SADC and engagement with SADC processes, and that the message there in our engagement is really around how we fast track solutions for smallholder farmers. And in that aspect, how we fast track solutions for smallholder farmers and not forgetting the face that smallholder farmers come in, and that is the face of a woman as a farmer and the face of a woman as a contributor and a driver of transformative agricultural policies. We've set up this platform together with the Graça Machel Trust, the Mandela Institute for Development Studies, the Wits University, the Center for African Philanthropy, CAPSI, and ourselves, the Southern Africa Trust. And we have set it up as a platform for dialogue that allows for citizen-driven solutions towards social change. So this conversation, bringing together people who are tapping onto their social and intellectual capital, lived realities, the expertise that they're bringing to the table to help us think about what needs to be done in order to unlock change at a policy level. I quite liked what Domingos said, because it poses not just a challenge for the state, but a challenge for us. We are concerned and quite focused on the changes that need to happen within the regional intergovernmental coordination space, but there's a reminder there that implementation happens at a national level. So our work around holding states accountable to the delivery of policies has to be about following what is happening at the national level and pushing for this kind of transformation at a national level, and upscaling, mobilizing that to inform the regional dialogues. Domingos did mention the mechanisms for citizen engagement and the spaces that have been provided for civil society to engage with SADC. Domingos, you were mentioning the East and Southern Africa Forum as a formal space that SADC is engaging with. And within that space, I think we have to look at how do we disrupt it so that it provides a space for women to be at the center of ISAF and push for the issues that we had about today. Digitization of agriculture, access to information for smallholder farmers, particularly for women, access to finance, access to markets, access to inputs. And lastly, I think that an important thing that has come back is the need to rethink the policies, the need to rethink the agricultural system. So it's not just about implementing what was previously before, but can we have a conversation about the kind of agriculture, food systems that we're pushing forward? And I truly hope, Domingos, that there's an open, the space is really open for us to look at the kinds of agricultural policy that we are pushing forward within the broader political economy of our food systems. And with that, thank you so much for everybody, to everyone who contributed to the discussions today. There will be a continuation. We'll take some of the themes that came out today: digitization, access to energy, the question around rethinking the nature and the ideology even behind the policy that drives our food systems, but also just what is required at a practical level. These are conversations that we will take forward within the series of our webinars on food systems and food security. The next one is going to be on the, I'm going to find the date, on the 26th of August, same time at 4 p.m. On the Southern Africa Trust YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for that very succinct close and passionate close, Machel. I think just thank you for everybody to joining this session. And yes, see you same time, Machel, putting it out there, 26th of August, to continue discussion on food security. Thank you very much for joining us.
And we hope SADC will be there again.
Thank you very much. Yes.